Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. During a visit to Warsaw, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said that Russia remains a dire threat and that boosting defence spending is essential. He also lauded Poland's defence spending, which is on a target to hit 4.7% of GDP this year. Mr. Rutte added that despite the United States changing priorities under the Donald Trump administration, the partnership between Europe and North America remains the bedrock of our alliance. In light of President Trump's threats not to support NATO allies if they were attacked, is Mark Rutte's confidence misplaced? How do we see US commitment to NATO, and what does the future hold for the alliance? Well, to answer those questions, we're joined by Jon Sweet, retired US military intelligence officer. Mr. Sweet, welcome to TVP World and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me back on the show.
It's a pleasure, sir. So, I mean, is Mark Rutte's confidence misplaced? I mean, he's saying basically the relationship between Europe and the US is, well, business as usual. Would you agree?
I'm not sure it's business as usual. There's been some strains, obviously, in the relationship, particularly from the perspective of the Trump administration about the amount of money contributing countries are contributing to the collective defense. As you know, the agreed upon amount was 2% GDP, and we still have 8 countries that have not met that GDP, while we have countries like Poland at 4.12%, the United States currently contributing about 3.38%. So I think there's a misperception that Europe may not be doing enough, but I think Europe is contributing and has contributed a lot towards their collective defense, but also towards the defense of Ukraine.
Understood. Now, there is obviously no doubt that this is something that President Trump has made a point of, even in his first term as president. And, European countries are finally, it seems, waking up to the need for increased defense spending. Does that mean that President Trump's attitude towards the US's role in NATO remains solid now?
I believe the role for the United States remains solid in the form right now of we have commitment as far as troops that are permanently assigned throughout Europe, and we also have rotational forces that are coming in. As you know, there's a U.S. Army Infantry Brigade right now in Poland that's rotating through. So the commitment's there. I don't think there'll ever be less than what you're seeing today. But what I believe his point again is the collective security of Europe involves all of Europe, not just the United States as the overwatch big brother taking on the burden. And I believe from his perspective, at least, the United States has taken on more of a burden. And because of issues that we have domestically now, and because of issues that are going on in the Pacific, we just can't afford to look at Europe in the same manner that we have within the past decades.
Understood. Now, there is another recent development. At the moment, the United States is considering giving up the role of Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. The conversation is in very early stages. What can you tell us about that?
And that has been considered in the past as far as having a rotational commander in that position, and historically that commander though has been an American commander. No, I think that's good for the alliance to put forth commanders from NATO countries to manage and to lead NATO forces. I think putting that European face on it is good. I think though when that happens, that from the Trump perspective, stepping back away from the leadership role, he may have some issues with decisions that are being made by those commands. So it's a double-edged sword. We'll just have to see where it goes. But I think a rotational command is not out of the question.
Okay, understood. Now, I'd like to move on, please, if I may, to the U.S. brokering of peace talks in the war between Ukraine and Russia. We're talking about a ceasefire at the moment, not peace. How would you assess they're going at the moment?
That's a very good question, because from my perspective, Mark Toth and I, and we've written on this extensively, both in the Hill but also in the Kyiv post. We really see this more as as discussions to reestablish U.S. and Russian relations more than it is discussions to negotiate a ceasefire. We're not seeing ceasefires. We're seeing actions that benefit Russia by not targeting energy infrastructure. What we're not seeing is Russia stopping their attacks on Ukrainian civilians. We're not seeing Russian ground assaults stopping. What we're seeing are issues that Russia deems important for them to continue if you will, their efforts in Ukraine. It's not beneficial to Ukraine. So it's hard to step back and say that we're going somewhere in a ceasefire because the attacks continue.
Excuse me. Now, Steve Witkoff, President Trump's envoy to these ceasefire talks, has said some things which might have raised a few eyebrows. For example, he's perhaps indicating that the areas of Ukraine which Russia has taken are actually Russian because most of the people there speak Russian. Well, that could be said of many countries. It's never a reason to invade. Is Steve Witkoff the right man for the job?
Clearly, from my perspective, Steve Witkoff is not the right man for the job. He's a businessman, and right now he's trying to broker a business deal. And in order to broker that business deal, he's trying to accommodate a Russian aggressor so they can get to the next phase, which are the business deals. Now, what I think the Trump administration needs to do, again, from the perspective of Mark Toth and I, we need to bring General Keith Kellogg back into the fold and show Mr. Witkoff the door, because you're right, he's been extremely accommodating verbally outside of the conference room. We don't know what's actually being said inside the conference room and the promises or concessions that are being made. Right now, no concessions have been made by Russia other than what they want Ukraine to give up and what they want the United States to provide. So him repeating Russian talking points is not helpful to the ceasefire or peace deal negotiations.
Now, many in Europe feel that there is a disconnect between the reality on the ground in Ukraine and Russia's attitude and the United States as it currently is operating in terms of its foreign policy. By that I mean that basically President Trump's administration doesn't understand the threat that Russia poses, not only to Ukraine, but other countries after that. Would you agree that there is this disconnect?
Yeah, I believe they don't look at it from a holistic perspective. Look, Russia is deeply ingrained in the Middle East through Iran. They're deeply ingrained in Southeast Asia through North Korea. They've been exceptionally active throughout the Sahel region of Western Africa. They are involved in the coup that occurred in the Sudan. And of course, we can talk about all the sabotage that they've been conducting or been alleged to have conducted in Europe and throughout the Baltic Sea. So they are a threat beyond Ukraine, and I think they're trying to separate Russia from that, but it's all interconnected. And of course, the one point I like to make about that is consider what's going on right now in Yemen. A few months ago, Reuters News reported that Iran had set up negotiations between Russia and Yemen, the Houthis, to provide them anti-ship missiles. And those very anti-ship missiles could have been used against the Truman just a week ago.
Now, with all of this happening, John, do you see a return to the Cold War?
It's possible. It really is possible because eventually something's going to occur that's going to stop the Russian push. But we both know that Russia is intent on conquering Ukraine. Ukraine is intent on reestablishing sovereign borders. So somewhere along the line, a line's going to have to be drawn. And when that line's drawn, there's going to have to be military forces on one side and military forces on another side to keep that area secure. Now, who is in that area, that demilitarized zone, is yet to be determined. You know, the European Union, well, I say the Union, France and the United Kingdom at one time offered to provide troops. Now they're asking for UN peacekeepers, which I don't think, and many don't think, is the right answer for that. So A Cold War, it could be. It's very likely. And it was mentioned in an article today in TVP World that the Russian economy is now a wartime economy, and they've ramped up the production of military equipment. So we're heading in that direction, at least from a conventional perspective. Strategically, we're already there.
If that scenario were to take place, which of course would be extremely unfortunate, do you see an aligned response to Russia and its allies from Europe and the US? And by this I mean, if we look at Europe and the countries in the European Union, very often we don't see alignment. We see bickering and disagreement and slow walking things. Do you think that's going to change when the threat of Russia becomes real?
I'm not sure, and that's a great question, because right now you already have a fracture, if you will, in the alliance, both the European Union but also NATO when it comes to Hungary and it comes to Slovakia. Both of them seem to be leaning right towards Russia, but not necessarily for military support, more so for energy needs. So you're going to have to satisfy energy needs, and Putin's doing the best he can to divide the alliance, to make the United States to make decisions that could alienate the European Union or alienate NATO, or again along the lines of energy. And of course, energy is critical, and Russia has been a provider of energy to Europe for the past 2 decades, and it's hard. It's very difficult for the European countries to separate themselves, and we're seeing that already. In that for the past 3 years, European countries have provided more money for gas, liquid natural gas, from Russia than they have provided to Ukraine.
Well, you mentioned, just very quickly, if you would, John, you mentioned Hungary and Slovakia. What about Turkey? Because they've been very much playing it down the middle here, haven't they?
Well, they certainly have, and not just in the NATO realm. We see it in the Middle East too by supporting Hamas. No, Turkey has been Turkey's been on the edge several times concerning relationships with Russia. They have purchased Russia equipment. They have gone into alliances, if you will, for oil pipelines. They control, obviously, the entrance and exit in and out of the Black Sea. So Turkey has been an issue at times also. So there are 3 countries right now who do have the potential to disrupt, at least from the NATO perspective, any NATO votes, but also in the European Union. Obviously, Turkey's not a member of the European Union, but Hungary and Slovakia can disrupt, and they have disrupted funding for Ukraine just recently, I believe.
Yes. Hungary, indeed. So lots of moving pieces, as always, John. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with our audience. Have a good day, sir.
Thank you very much for having me back on.
Thank you. Bye now. And that's all from us here on TVP World. Good night.